Do we live under God's rule or the government? Do we live under God's rule or the government? So that was what I was thinking about for the past couple of weeks. Because, well, look at us here. We're distanced. We've got masks on, diligently obeying the latest round of rules for us and mandates to obey. And it can be hard to keep up sometimes. What are we doing this week? Where can I go this week? Do I have to wear a mask here? Do I have to wear it there? Can I come to church and sing? There's a hotspot. Oh, I better check where I've been the last couple of weeks using the check-in app. It's a bit tedious, is it? It's a bit frustrating, isn't it? Thank you, James. It is frustrating. I've seen some in the US call us a nanny state, that we've given up our liberties and we're following the government at each will and whim, and they pity us because we've traded our liberty for protection. They say things like, Australia is gone. Don't go to Australia anymore. And, there's an element in which those in the US might be right. As we reflect on our lives and we reflect on our day-to-day goings around here, maybe what Scott Morrison and what Don Perrottet says has more bearing on me when I go in and out of my house than what God says in his word. And so the question really bothers me, whose authority am I living under? Whose authority are you living under? As a Christian, should I feel right and free to live out my faith, to come into church and to sing without a mask on? We live in a society that has a separation of church and state, right? The state can't tell me how to worship. But on the other hand, should I be mindful of the government and its aim? Should I be mindful that its goal is to try and protect others? And so I should deny my own liberties, my own human rights for a time. Whose authority do I live under? And I was relieved to see that Trent gave me this passage, because this idea is dealt with today. Particularly because in Jesus' day, there is no divide between polity and religion. There's no divide between state and religion, especially when the head of the state, Caesar, thinks he's a god. And this is where we find ourselves. When you came in, as well as your bulletins, you will have got an outline. So you can use this to follow along with my ramblings. I encourage you to use that. And the passage starts off with the Pharisees and the Herodians coming together to catch Jesus in his word. It can be quite easy for us just to skim over those words, but don't, because this is actually quite a big thing that's happening. This is chalk and cheese, apples and oranges. Thank you very much. Completely going out of my head, right? These guys could not be further apart. The Pharisees, right, they hated everything Roman. The Romans had come in, invaded their land, and tried to impose their own god on them and made them pay things like taxes. But then we've also got the Herodians. The Herodians, they actually ended up benefiting from the Romans invading. Maybe their businesses got a bit of a pep up. They gained popularity, they gained power. And so everything Roman, including taxes, they are for it, right? These guys, you can't get them further apart. It's almost like trying to say, well, the political left and right, they're the same. It's not. But one thing they have in common: Jesus has been bad for both of them. For the Pharisees, Jesus has openly criticized them and criticized their teachings, saying that they don't actually understand the true heart of God, which is a big deal for them because they're really on religion, right? And then we've got the Herodians. Jesus has openly criticized their leader, King Herod, and he criticizes them for selling out in their religion. And so both of these seemingly, unjoinable groups come together as allies. Because, if forgive me for this, but if ancient Judea had social media, the things that Jesus had said about these people would have meant that these guys would have been losing followers left, right, and center. And so they come together to form a plan to catch Jesus in his word. This passage, awesome. And so we're going to have a look again at the passage, look down at verse 13. Later, they sent some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and they said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the word of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we?" And there's a couple things in this passage that we ought to notice. They really butter Jesus up, don't they? They really try to set him up as something. They set him up as three things. First of all, they call him a man of integrity. That is to say that he's truthful, that he's honest, right? Perhaps even he has great wisdom and knowledge, so that everyone who hears him there, they ought to listen to his worthy words. Secondly, they say he isn't swayed by others. That is, he's not concerned with what other people think of him. Quite literally, the idiom they use for this is, "You don't look for the face of other men." And I thought that was quite catchy. He's not concerned with appeasing or pleasing anybody. And finally, number three, they profess Jesus to teach the true way of God. And now this one's quite interesting because neither of them believe that. But they say this so that whatever Jesus says about the tax, the people will do it because the people like Jesus. They believe Jesus. In this passage, there are lots of people around. We can expect them to be in the temple, right? And so this is a show. This is all a political show. Two sides trying to win Jesus over to theirs so they can gain popularity again. But there's more to it than that. Let's keep going. They ask the question, is it right to pay the imperial tax or not? On your outlines on the back, there is a picture of the denarius. Jesus will ask someone to bring him one of these. Yeah, Josh, if you might bring the denarius slide up and then so that everybody at home can see it, that'd be awesome. Thank you. And this is what, when Jesus says, whose inscription, this is what he means. There is a face on the coin. Coins like this came into existence only a few hundred years before Jesus. Each coin was handmade, hand-stamped, to signify who the coin belonged to, whose kingdom backed up its value, and who was the final owner of that coin. And this denarius is very similar to what would have been brought to Jesus. And we believe when they say, should we pay the tax? When they say tax, they're referring to what's called a poll tax or a head tax. And I'll read this out directly, a definition of that. A poll tax or a head tax is a tax levied as a fixed sum on every liable individual, typically an adult, without reference to income or resources. So basically, if you're an adult and you live in the land, you must pay this tax. Doesn't matter what you do for a job, doesn't matter how much you earn, doesn't matter how many people in your family, you must pay this amount or we will arrest you. That's what's going on. But there's a bit of a kicker. You only had to pay this if you weren't a Roman citizen. If you were an invaded people, if you were a dominated people, then you had to pay this tax. So there was racial connotation with the tax. There was idea of value. And so particularly for the Jews in our passage, especially the Pharisees, there was a feeling of humiliation. Some of them even saw it as a bit of a prelude to slavery, being forced to do something they don't want to do, being forced to give over their money to someone who's come in and taken over their lives. But it gets even worse than this. If we look at the coin closely, on the side with the face, there's an inscription. It's paraphrased, but it reads this: Tiberius Caesar Augustus, son of the divine Augustus. So the picture is someone who claims to be the son of a god. The flip side reads Pontifex Maximus, which translates to high chief priest in the Roman church. Therefore, for some of the Jews, to pay this tax would mean to acknowledge that that person is a god. And for Jews, there's only one God. So this is a struggle. This hurts. And so there are there are a couple of responses to this. First, you had some Jewish zealots who decided that's not on at all. They're not going to pay homage to this person. And so they refused to pay the tax altogether, and they lived in hiding. Some, like the Pharisees, were humiliated by the tax. They still wanted to worship God as the only God, but they saw that they were, as a people, dominated, and it was not time for them to rise up yet. And so they paid it, but they felt bad about it. And then thirdly, there were people like the Herodians who, as you might guess, quite willingly paid it, because anything Roman is great for us. So we'll gladly do this. And so when they ask the question, should we pay the tax or not, the issue on the table is more than just tax. It's sovereignty. Who is God? Who do we acknowledge as God? Is it right to say this person is a god? Whose authority do we live under? Now we get back to the passage. The way the question is asked, we can assume that a Pharisee asks it because it supposes a negative answer. It's designed to throw Jesus onto the horns of a dilemma. To answer yes would be to discredit him in the eyes of the people because they all hate the Romans. To answer no would be to invite pressure from Roman authorities, as he would declare himself a rebel. But they don't get a yes or no answer. They get an unhesitating reply. Let's read the rest of the passage. But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. Why are you trying to trap me? He asked. Bring me a denarius and let me look at it. And they brought the coin, and he asked them, whose image is this? And whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. And then Jesus says to them, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. And they were amazed at him. Are you okay, Rita? Jesus knows exactly what they're trying to do, and he's not fooled at all. It was a yes or no question, yes, but he's not going to answer it like that. He's not going to be a pawn in their little political drama. He goads them. Who does the coin belong to? Pay it to whom it belongs to, and then give to God what belongs to him. I just see that we're having some issues with the visuals for Zoom. If you're still listening, that's okay. We're sorting them out. In short and summary, Jesus' answer is this. Who does the coin belong to? Pay it back to that person, and then give to God what belongs to him. And that leaves us with a bit of a question, doesn't it? What belongs to God? What belongs to God? I love Jesus' answer because it's centered on the idea of likeness. Whose image is on the coin? Whose image does it bear? Because that tells you who it belongs to. And so, what bears the image of God? Do you know? What bears the image of God? You do. You do. In your outline, I have Genesis 1. Genesis 1, 26, 27 reads this, and then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea, the birds of the sky, and over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. Verse 27, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. You are the image of God on earth. You are his representative, walking, talking, thinking, being his image. And so what are the Pharisees and Herodians commanded to give back to God? Their own lives, themselves. This is a battle. It's a discussion of likeness. Whose image do we worship? Whose image do we acknowledge as sovereign? Right? And the Pharisees and the Herodians, they're caught up in this image of a coin. How do we respond to this person? What do we say to this person? Do we pay the tax or not? Jesus says, you've missed the point. It's not about a coin. It's about your heart. It's about your heart. Your faith has become political. It's a tool. You didn't come here to ask me how to worship God. You came here to ask me which team I choose. Jesus' big teaching here is whose likeness really matters. And it's this: God has final authority in my life, not Caesar. God has final authority in your life, not Caesar. Caesar can hurt you. Caesar can imprison and punish you for not paying tax. He can even put you to death, but that's it. Elsewhere, Jesus will warn, don't fear men like Caesar. Fear God, who can kill your body and soul in hell. But not only does God lay claim to their lives, but everything that God has blessed them with. And Jesus' answer whispers this also. Yes, the coin belongs to Caesar, but you belong to God. All things ultimately belong to God because he made them. Therefore, God is the final authority in their lives, not Caesar. And so how ought we to listen to this passage today? How does it speak to us? Well, I want to keep thinking about likeness. You and I, we are made in the image of God. And in that respect, there are some ways in which you are like the coin. God gives you inherent worth, dignity, and identity. First of all, worth. God loves you. You are made in his image. You are worth so much, he would sacrifice his own son to die horrifically on the cross for you. You are worth more than you know. Secondly, you have dignity. God gives you dignity. Every day he wakes you up in the morning, he gives you breath, he sustains you. He gives you these things because your life is worth living. You have dignity. Thirdly, you have identity. The coin belongs to a country. It's backed up by the wealth of a kingdom. You belong somewhere as well, don't you? Maybe we're like money in a foreign country. We belong, but it's not here. It's with our Father, in whose likeness we have been impressed and made. You belong with him. And since we have these things, worth, dignity, identity, we ought to give to God what belongs to him. And so this is number 2 from our passage today. What is that? We ought to give God what he is owed. But what does belong to God? Is it my Sundays? Is it my Bible study evenings? Is it that 10% of my income? Is it the minute before I eat my food? No, everything. Our lives belong to God. I love, there's a version of the liturgy we use at 8 o'clock because it opens the liturgy by looking at Deuteronomy 6:4-9. And part of that passage is, well, you can help me repeat this, all right? So I don't want to hear crickets. Love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Very good. And by strength, it doesn't mean muscles. Not all of us are as big as Arnie, right? It doesn't mean he can worship God better. No. When it says strength, it means everything that you have power over. Your money, your household, your clothes, your cars, everything you have power over, use those to glorify God. And that's what Jesus is saying here. What belongs to God? You do. And so give to God you and everything that comes with you. God is not someone who we just simply pay a tax to, like a Caesar. He can't be nodded at from a pew. He can't be acknowledged once a week. Because at the end of our lives, we will have to give an account. We will have to pay up. And friends, if that account is not Jesus and Jesus alone, then I've already said we have hell to pay for it. But good news, because that's not the case, is it? That Jesus, only a short time after this, ascended a mountain, carried a cross on his back and died so that we would not have to pay that bill. He took the price for us. And so that means that we can live lives and give to God what belongs to God. And that brings us to our last thing, point 3, that we can remind ourselves and we can be glad that we live in a nation that has a spiritual separation between church and state. We can obey the government. We can do what the government asks us to because they are not the final authority over our lives, not over yours, not over mine. We can still pay the taxes, but you give the rest of your life to God. Even the way you pay taxes glorifies God. You do it honestly. And this is what Paul writes in Romans 13. I've given that to you in your outline as well. Now, the rules of our land can be frustrating. They're annoying. They're hard to keep up with. And some of you are at home doing a great job because you've been asked to. Us here, we're distancing, we're wearing masks like I started with. We're abiding by the Lord so that we can get on with our lives. That is to get on with worshiping God. Now, yes, there are times when Christians should have serious discussions and consider, is obeying the government the right thing? But I think our passage shows us today that that discussion is a little further away than we think it is. So to finish, we live in a land that we don't belong, don't we? We live amongst the people to whom they're not our own. But we live according to the laws and the politics of this land. But the rest of our lives, in fact, all of our lives, we give to God. We engage with the laws and with the politics in such a way that others around us would see that we love God and that God is the final authority in our lives. And this is what I want to finish on. Let me encourage you to keep up with your check-ins. Keep up with wearing the mask where you must, distance where you must, pay the tax where you must. But remember that God is the final authority over all these things. And that all governments, especially Caesar, are responsible to God and accountable to God at the end of the day. But for you, give to God what is God.